A lot of the biotech startups come with hard science, but the data points, like we just discussed, are very scientific and are not always implemented enough on what could be an application.
What makes it hard to invest in early stage biotech startups?
We only can do it because we're backed by a big biotech institution. Because from an investment point of view and a return on investment in a typical cycle, this is not the best bet in a very early phase.
Today we are joined by Annick Verween, head of Biotope at VIB, where she invests and supports diverse early-stage biotech startups positively impacting the health of our planet. It's the perfect timing because Biotope has been named one of Europe's leading startup hubs by the Financial Times, so that's quite a great timing to record this podcast. And in this episode, we explore the funding gap at the early stage, how specialized incubators and accelerators can help startups get to seed funding, and why we need more investors backing early biotech companies. Let's dive in. Annick, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it. And I guess to kick things off, could you explain briefly how you define early stage startups in biotech?
No, perfect. And thanks for having me, Hugo. Well, early stage, very often when it comes to biotech, we talk about the TRL levels. And for us, it's a TRL between 2 to 4. Although we like a 5, everybody likes a little bit more than what is feasible. But that's for us early stage. So they're very often companies who have biotech in their hands, not only in their head, but it's very immature. They haven't thought about what could be a potential application, really putting things in the market yet. That's for us really early stage.
So basically what you're saying is that they're potentially in the lab, they have maybe a technical solution, but they don't really know where to sell it, right?
Yes. And definitely specifically in biotech, what they very often have is they have a platform, a technology platform that has a solution to everything. But of course, that's not how a startup works.
Yeah, so do you think that comes from the fact that funders usually in biotech are scientists and therefore they don't think about the commercial aspect of it?
Yes. One of the first things we always learn them is not to stop loving your technology, but start to fall in love with the problem we're solving. And I think that says it completely. And as a scientist, you like to stay in your comfortable scientific world where you can really, all the small things about your technology. But we see that a lot of these startups are so convinced of what they have, technology-wise, that I think that all the rest will follow. So I think your consensus is definitely correct.
And how do you teach a scientist to become a seller?
Yeah, it's a good thing. First of all, for us, what is important is that we at least have 2 people in the team. So not a sole scientist, because you cannot master it all, or at least very few people can master it all. So we try to look for this complementarity already in a very early phase. But on the other hand, just by explaining them in an early phase that the technology is great, but who their clients could be and what their focus could be, forces them to really narrow down on a problem, a product. And that's how, and it takes time, but slowly some of them really come to the understanding like, okay, I master both business and science, but a lot of them think this is the moment to just add somebody in my team who has that expertise. And then we have this perfect puzzle.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess today's topic is about the funding gap that we have in biotech and specifically at early stage. I'm curious, what makes it hard to invest in early stage biotech startups? Why do we see so few people investing there?
We only can do it because we're backed by a big biotech institution. Because from an investment point of view and a return on investment in a typical cycle, this is not the best bet in a very early phase. And for me, it is very often the case that the road to market is so far that a lot of investors want to de-risk much more than they already should. A lot of the biotech startups come with hard science, but the data points, like we just discussed, are very scientific and are not always implemented enough on what could be an application. And that makes it very difficult for investors to really grasp what is the potential and to look beyond a vision that could be, but also look beyond, this is nice science, what's in it?
That's for sure. I think that's very interesting. Although I would go back to what you said on this is not the best bet at early stage. What would be the best bet then? Like if you were not to invest in these companies, where would you invest?
I'm just saying it's not the best bet if you look at return on investment. I do think it's an amazing bet if you want to bet on long-term impact. But that's not always how things work, right? Ideally, you have the combination of both, and then biotech just takes a very, very long time. But I still do believe that if these early teams get the right support also in this early phase, they can make much more progress than I do now.
And what is the type of support they can get? Because obviously, at Biotope, you have an accelerator, an incubator, and you also invest in them. Like, what is the support that you can give them?
Well, for us, well, maybe one step back. I built Biotope because I used to work in a European startup environment, seeing a lot of incubators and accelerators. I think specifically 5, 6 years ago in ag and food, we had plenty. And all of them had a bit the same principle. We scout for startups, we put them in a program, they have all these workshops, and in the end, we have a demo day. I felt that in biotech, a lot of these companies were going through workshops, developing a sales plan, marketing, whatever, but they were not really challenged on the technology. The aim was you're a scientist, you master that. But very often it means that a lot of these companies came with bold promises, which they could never, ever fulfill. And I think that's why at Biotope we decided just to focus on first this biotechnological package. We're really convinced that if the biotechnology and the IP, and I'm sure that we will come back to that later, is already quite fixed, you can build a lot on top of that. It's not the only recipe for success, but that's a key thing. So how we work is we work very individually. We have an accelerator, but we only support 3 companies per cohort, and we have 2 per year. And that's really with a tailored support by a startup manager. Because also in biotech, the idea is that most of the companies, and that's general for startups, have the same challenges, but they rarely have it at the same moment in time. So pushing them all through a workshop principle does not necessarily work. We also force them to go back to the lab, make their hands and their feet dirty. Our portfolio companies will definitely say that's one of the sentences I use most. But to also keep on working and implementing technology-wise and lab-wise what they learned in a sales pop, in a sales training, in a go-to-market training, in a customer interaction. So that's how we try to help them really tailor-made. And it's a network of people, I think. It's always a network of partners, logos, but for us it's important that these are people who are a phone call away. And if a startup is struggling with something, he or she can just pick up the phone, we do it, and there's this quick yes or no, and a company can move forward.
That makes a lot of sense. What's the impact of that? Because obviously you also invest in them. So I'm curious, you've been running that accelerator for a few years. What have you seen after the accelerator? Do you see startups succeeding better than, startups that wouldn't go through the accelerator? Like, what's the impact of it?
Well, we're still quite young. As you say, it's just a couple of years. We invest 2 to 4 companies per year, meaning 13 investment. We hopefully can announce 3 more now in the next coming weeks. But okay, it's limited data points if I then go back to data-driven biotech science. But what we see is that these teams are more aware of what it takes to convince the next investor, the seed investor. So what we try to do, and I think most of them can acknowledge that, is to bring them in this right path and to make sure that they do not deviate or really dig into the teeny weeny details that a customer is not interested in. It's like a startup who says that I have an ingredient and the purity is 100%, and the cost is triple what it is now. If you go to an ingredient supplier, they will say, for me, 85% is more than enough, but please decrease the price. And then if you then go back, you see that the scientist very often has been over developing and designing and whatever. So there's this mismatch. So we try to bring these different fields quicker together. And I think that you should speak to the portfolio that these companies are better equipped. The proof of the pudding is that we claim to bring companies to a successful seed round in 18 months. Initially, we started 12 months. We also started this very ambitiously, like a startup. But I think these days, and also biotech, it's impossible, but in 18 months. So if we then see that only half of our portfolio went through this 18 months, we have 4 companies who already raised successfully their seed rounds. Not all, of course. Some because they will not make it in the end. Some also because it's a difficult climate for everybody.
For sure. And I think 18 months is quite a number because I would say that the average right now from the latest data I've seen is like between 24 and 36 months between rounds. So 18 is quite fast. But going back to what you said on pushing them to the seed round, what makes a biotech startup fundable at the seed stage? What is a good recipe for that?
For us, it's having good validated data points. I think very often they're so small scale that traction is difficult. Luckily, to me, the days are over that the letter of intent of a potential customer that will buy 10 tons at an I don't know what price does not count anymore. So they try to work together with corporates in an early phase to have some kind of paid pilot to do the upscaling a little bit and really know what they're going for. But for me, it's this having more data points to prove that the science is solid, to be realistic. I think there's still a lot of startups, probably not only in biotech, who like to oversell what they can do. And I have the feeling that a lot of investors, by the way, and I think they should really look at realistic things. And the dream might come, but okay, that's up to them and the founders together. But as always, in an early stage, the people.
Yeah, no, of course. Of course, I think just to summarize what you said, I mean, part of it's like, how do you de-risk the tech? How do you have somehow a proof of concept, at least from a data perspective? And then having a great team is about everything at the early stage. So, in that journey to get to seed, what are the options for startups? Like, where can you get money if you need, like, for example, grants or non-dilutive funding? Like, is it good to bridge the gap from pre-seed to seed or to seed to Series A? Like, is that an option?
It's not the only part of the equation. However, it's a very important one. If you look at our companies, since they joined Biotope, altogether they raised 28 million, 3/4 of that being grants. So there is definitely an appetite grant-wise for biotech startups. However, it's not enough. A lot of the grants focus on maturing the technology and tend to fall into the typical thing like customers will follow automatically. And the investors, they bring the other part of the equation to the table. They force you to go out and to say, but show me traction and show that there's really, really somebody interested in what you produce and not in the platform. That's the backbone of your company, but that's not what you're selling. So yes, I think grants are key. Luckily, this combination of diluted and non-diluted become more mainstream. There's a few grant options now who are really trying to focus on added value grants for companies and not this in a consortium improving things on a very small TRL level. So it works, but it's definitely not all of it. And I think there's a gap there for sure.
So we always come back to that story, which is like, what is the value to the customer? How can you find customers? Can you sell your product? That's really the challenge that we find there. Something else that I'm curious to learn more about is what we call the valley of death. And I think it applies to most startups, most verticals. I think it's not unique to biotech, but what is it and how can startups survive it?
Indeed. And I think the value of that, I think for me, and I hope most startups already realize, is now a canyon of that full of valleys. Because to be honest, when we built this pre-seeding, it was just to break that cycle. There are these promising startups, they have something tangible, but it's so teeny weeny small. So on the other side, you have corporates and investors who say, there's something in it. I feel it, but it's not enough. Please give me more. And then the startup always needs to say, with pleasure, but please give me the money, whether it's something that we can decide from a corporate perspective or an investor perspective. And the investor always says, but you know what? That's not how it works. Please first deliver on the promise, and then I will give you the money. So that's why we decided to build Biotope, to almost break that cycle, give these early promising startups the firepower to get to that next phase and convince them. But now that we're there, we feel that some of the early stage investors tend to be a little bit more risk averse. So they expand a little bit. So there's just another gap. And I think that stays a difficult one. I have the feeling that a lot of startups in general spend/lose a lot of time looking for money. And I think that's a pity.
Yeah, it's a full-time job to raise money.
Oh my God. Yes, it is.
But to that extent, what can be done to attract these investors at earlier stages? Like, how can we encourage them to invest earlier?
If I would know that now, that would be amazing. I would write an amazing book on that. But um, two things. It's by, I think, showcasing good successes always help, that it is still possible. Not as many as previous, but I think that's not bad. If a bubble bursts, some rise from the ashes and show that they can do it and that they are stronger. So I think science-wise, that's a good thing. Have them involved in a very early phase. We also encourage startups to talk to investors. And then they say, yeah, but come on, the first thing you tell us is that with Biotope, this urge of fundraising should be off the radar. But then you force us to talk to people. And I think that's a big thing. You should just talk without selling what you have, but really understanding. And I think if that happens, if investors are earlier part of this whole development and understanding what the challenges are and how different parties around the table try to solve it, hopefully that also gives them some comfort.
Yeah, and I think the common saying is that you need to talk to investors at least 12 months before you need money to build that relationship, which makes sense. I mean, it's very hard for someone that invests in companies to have a founder come to him and say, hey, or to him or her and say, hey, like, I need $1 million. Do you want to invest? Like, that's hard from a relationship perspective. But continuing on that topic of financing early stage startups in biotech, what trends do you see? Like, is there something that's emerging the last few years that you've been in that space that gives you hope, I guess?
Well, yes, well, there's hope from an impact perspective, and there's hope from a growth perspective for a startup, meaning raising money. Yeah. But I think when it comes to hope for an impact perspective, it's not only in biotech. I see that all the entrepreneurs that we work with, and I think that's why I myself, and I think a lot of peers like what we do, they do it for a reason. And they want to still make this a better place. And I think that's in all of our favor. And it would be such a pity to take away dreams of early believers instead of igniting them to at least try to make the best out of it. I think that's the first thing. I have the feeling that the added value that they can bring impact-wise, we see a lot more trends coming up from cosmetic industry, fashion industry, materials, that also the sustainability push almost is coming up. So I think that's really promising. Also for us, we started off in egg and food. Now we're broadening into planetary health, like many more, just because we don't want to lose out on these promising opportunities outside of this very narrow field. So I think that these are very interesting things that we see impact-wise, that there's things happening there and new things being developed. When it comes to investment, I have the feeling what might be easier for some investors is this bridge between real biotech and an AI tool bringing these solutions to the market. It's a bit this bridge of this very long timeline in biotech and a way shorter timeline of a SaaS platform and getting customers on that. So that's a bit the two things that excite me and that I see.
How does that look like, an AI platform on top of a biotech? Because obviously, I mean, these days, if you say AI to any investors, all of a sudden the discussion looks a bit different, right?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And I, by the way, I'm not an AI expert. So also for me, these words, if I see them on a slide, I tend to run away. But I do believe that we talked about biotechnology and all these data points, right? Data. There's so much data coming out of experiments, out of upscaling. And very often they are a means to an end, but there's not really built upon. So we see that a lot of the biotech solutions, they solve a problem or they cover a need. But this whole predictive power that a lot of these data points can have, if you look forward, that's not being bet upon enough. So we see more and more companies who say, okay, I work, and a very typical example, the soul microbiome. I think in regenerative ag, everybody's still looking for a business model that is not only good for Earth, but also is good, economically wise. And what we see there now more and more is measuring the microbiome is one thing, but being able to predict how the future should look like if your soil is being under some kind of use, or there's some pesticides being used, and how that changes the microbiome, that's really a very tangible thing. And that's, for example, a tangible example where we see the combination of both. Yeah, we have the same on shelf life. There's a company predicting shelf life, which is nice. Shelf life prediction takes ages if you do it in a lab. They have a kit that does it very quickly. But to be honest, if you do new product development, it's way easier to already beforehand, based on ingredients, know how will the shelf life of this product be. So, and that's again a combination of you have your whole microbial library and tools upon that, and you build on the data that you have generated over time and have some predictive power in that.
And so, if I push that discussion a bit further, would you say that the reason for some biotech startups that they didn't succeed is because they were too much focused on like measuring only to predicting, which then all of a sudden unlock a new layer for customers? Because if a farmer can predict the health of his soil and when he's going to be able to plant again, for example, that's so much value for him, right? So is that where we're going, like from analyzing what's today to predicting what's tomorrow, and that's where the value is going to be?
Yeah, I think it definitely will be. On the other hand, specifically with data, with my limited knowledge, crap in, crap out. So you need to have a lot of, again, these validated data points to build something that has predictive power that makes sense. So you will still need both. But I think indeed predicting the future, I think for all of us, is almost the next step, and how you can almost avoid soil degradation, for example, if we go back to that one example.
And do you think that will contradict the misconception that biotech investment take a long time to see returns? Because if we all of a sudden we have an AI platform or a data platform or a SaaS on top of it, then all of a sudden the returns comes much faster, as we know in software. Do you think that will change the game?
It might be. I think it's too early to predict that. We have a few of these companies in our portfolio, but okay, they still have a long way to go. We think it might have a positive effect. On the other hand, when we talk to then more the investors from the digital world, they speak a totally different language. For them, 5 years is even ages to get a return. So that's a bridge that we now are also trying to build, to put more data people together with biotech people and see how we can build this innovations of the future, specifically on biotech.
And is that misconception actually true? That is it actually a misconception that biotech startups take longer than other startups to succeed and to bring returns?
I think a few examples have proven wrong, but the majority of the cases still take long. And the problem is also a little bit, Hugo, is that it's not always in their own hands. It's not because they move slow. Oh my God, they want to go so fast. But technology-wise, if you're in ag biotech, for example, and you want to do something with crops, there's only that amount of seasons in a year. So that's already something that limits you down. But on the other hand, there's also all these important things beyond their control. And I think there, and now I'm touching on always a difficult thing in Europe, but regulation and timelines really definitely do not help there.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I guess to transition to another topic, so obviously it's hard to raise money for biotech startup at early stages. What is the advice that you give to funders in approaching VCs to, raise money with them? And I guess my question is twofold. One is like, how do you approach them? But also, who do you approach? Because it's a very particular type of investor that knows the risk and is okay with going there.
One thing you already mentioned, right? We are in a people business, and building relationships is so much more than asking for money. I think that would definitely be advice number one. Try to surround you with people who can help you beyond money. I think that's the first thing. Then when it comes to building relationships and how to approach them, yes, you should approach them. But I have the feeling that, and I don't think it's only biotech, but I can only speak for my world, that a lot of the startups, they know that investment is a marriage, at the cliche, like we're in this for the long term, but still they do not start early enough to do a good due diligence on who are the investors where I really want to work with and where I can work with. And I think there's definitely still a leap to make there.
Do you think that's something that only very high potential startups could do? Because obviously, the diligence on investors, I feel like, is something that obviously, if everyone wants to invest in your company, it's much easier to do than if you can't find anyone. And if there is one person, then you're almost forced to say yes.
No, I agree. But then the question is there only one person because you were too optimistic that it was going to go way faster and I need the money? Or is there only one person because maybe there's still something wrong and that one person sees something that other ones do not see, or vice versa? I still think it's the relationship management, right? The easier you can talk to those investors, the easier it is also to find out what they are really looking for. And I think we've seen also a lot of startups who tend to develop something, and then by the time they raise money, they realize that they were focusing on the wrong inflection points.
And that's a difficult one because all of a sudden you have years or months of work that are for nothing. And in terms of like approaching investors, is there a particular type of investor? So I'm thinking angel investors, CVCs, family funds, like microfunds. Like, is there within that landscape, is there someone that you see more potential to work with early stage biotech startups?
They still go very broad, of course, but if they have the opportunity and they're nicely in time to really build this network of investors with these long-term timelines, of course, family offices are for them number one. Very impact driven. You have some time to really prove your impact because promising and proving are two different things. So that's an important one. And we also feel that more and more CVCs become an attractive opportunity if they do not only focus on what's relevant for the corporate perspective, but on this positive impact that they want to create. With a lot of regular VCs, it becomes a bit difficult because you need to promise a timeline, which I think for most of them is totally not realistic.
What's a typical timeline for returning, like from an early stage perspective in biotech?
If we really looked at most of these companies, the return for the investment is at the exit. 12 to 15 is definitely not such an exaggeration.
Okay, no, that's very interesting. And I guess that means that we have to have specialized investors because obviously that 12 to 15 years doesn't really match with a lot of VCs. Although obviously, like you can also exit at, during the journey, right? You don't have to exit the company once they get acquired, for example. You can also, if you're a pre-seed investor like yourself, you could exit at Series A or B, and that's already quite a good return for you.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think also there are some startups, and not only the ones, by the way, who use AI, who really found something to break that cycle and to say instead of 12, for me, it's only 6 or 7, because yes, I have a biotechnology, but in theory, not all biotechnology should be very sophisticated and take years and years. So there are a few, and then the word biotech sometimes might be misleading, for sure.
I guess to go on another topic, which you already briefly mentioned, but part of the problem is not having enough traction, right? Like that's something that VCs don't like for sure. So I wonder if we go on the other side of the equation, which is more the scientific and technology aspects, how can you, as a funder, prove that because you have a great science or great technology, like how can the science and technology validation help when raising money?
I think it's very case dependent. What for us helps is, and as I mentioned it before, a lot of the biotech companies are platform companies. They have a technology, they can make a lot of different things, and then they stop a little bit there. We do a lot of things, and what then? And for them to focus on, I would not call it the beachhead product or market because they're definitely not there yet, but the more structured focus point makes it easier, because it makes it easier to do some calculations, talk to some potential customers on the long term, but get feedback on that specific compound or product or potential ingredient.
Well, I guess to bring a bit more light and hopefulness into the topic, I guess I would want to talk about the opportunities in biotech startups. Is there something you see, for example, within R&D, within the regulatory environment, within corporate partnerships? Is there something you see there that gives you hope?
Oh, I'm a very positive person, Hugo. um, I think what gives me hope is that there is still a sincere interest in biotechnological solutions, on the potential impact that they can create on the large scale. That's for sure. What also gives me hope is that a lot of the more typical B2C quick return companies are already there, or that they did not deliver on the promise. So there's definitely also the need from a corporate/investor perspective to look to broader opportunities. And I think there's so much more awareness on how a technology, whether it's biotech or deep tech or clean tech or synbio, all these fancy words, can contribute to that. And by seeing all these communities together thinking on how we can solve this problem stepwise, as you mentioned, for example, with exit from investors, I think that's hopeful. It's not like one investor, one corporate will need to drag this along all the way until the end. It's a network of people who support that.
For sure. And I guess to complement that, I'd love to hear a bit more about like maybe a story from your portfolio. I know you said, what is it, 3 startups, 2 batches per year, so that's 6 total, 13 in 2 years or something like that. Is there a company where you think they've done extremely well and that shows that it's possible?
Yes, but okay. Also, also these companies still have a very long road ahead. But for us, a very easy example to give is Amphastar. It's a Belgian company. They make surfactants out of waste, really waste. So it's a third generation surfactants, which can be used in many different applications in cosmetics, in agriculture, in food. And it's a spin-off from University of Ghent in Belgium as well. And well, when they joined Biotope, it was a bit the cliche, like I mentioned before. We have this whole bunch of patents lying there, so everything is nicely covered. We have a technology platform that can make almost any surfactant that you want from any waste, and still we do not find clients. So that's how they joined Biotope. And in a very early phase, we could, by again saying them, stop loving your technology, but loving a problem, force them into going for a very simple molecule, which for a scientist is almost something like, oh my God, there's no challenge in that. Why should we focus on that? But okay, a very simple biosurfactant a molecule that where Ecover was interested in to put in their cleaning products. And they had this whole branding, waste is only waste when you waste it, which I still think is a really nice tagline. They brought it on the market, got a lot of visibility. And for them, that was like, this is possible. So they were part of Biotope. Very quickly, they raised their pre-Series A together with ECBF, which is not a small investor when it comes to these kind of tickets. They were 2 when they joined Biotope. Now, a year and a half later, there's 22. They raised a huge European grant, a German grant. So they are the perfect combination of this grant/investment funding. And they now will, end of year, open their Series A to build a factory. So that's for us a really nice example.
Now, obviously. And what do you think played the biggest role in their success? Because obviously, one thing you mentioned already is like the mentorship, because you told them, hey guys, like you need to look at things differently and to really look at the solution for the customers as opposed to like just the technology. But, what else? Do you think the networking helped? Do you think that, I don't know, the infrastructure that you provide helps? Do you think the master classes that you provide help? Like, what do you think played the biggest role there?
Yeah, I think definitely the network, it still helps, by the way. I think we're still very close. We can still be in contact with them. And even now that we are out, because we converted in the seed round, I'm still like the shrink on a monthly basis. What are you struggling with and how can we help you? So that is definitely still there. When it comes to legal support that you are needing, when it's like we are looking for external advisors who can be part of that, I think there the power of the network is key. That goes for a lot of ecosystems, but it's also the case for us. So that definitely helped. What also helped is, and that might be so stupid, Hugo, is giving founders confidence that they can do this. It's like, I need now to play ball with the big guys or big girls. And can I do this? And again, this human thing, yes, you can, and you're stronger than you are. And okay, you know what your shortcomings are, but that's how you hire your team. That also definitely helps for sure.
Yeah, and I think there's a great example of that taken from the TV show Shark Tank, where someone came to raise money. They didn't get money, but everybody said, like, you're a great entrepreneur. And the person said, well, that's the best thing I could have hoped for because I've been wondering if I was actually an entrepreneur for the last 3 years. So I think the confidence part is often neglected, but it's actually very important. You mentioned the advisors. I wonder, like, what's the role of an advisor in biotech startups, and do you think that can really help bridge that gap for funding?
I think it does. Very often in these early phase, the team is 2 or 3 people, very often not even all of them on the payroll, by the way. But the smart minds in the company are much more than only that. And if you can have an advisor who really can help you, and depending on what your focus is, you need somebody who really understands the science, or you need somebody who knows the market. Having these advisors in a very regular way, by the way, not just only on a slide having some nice faces, but people that you only talk when your house is on fire, I think that does not help. But if you can embed these people and their knowledge and their network again in a structured way, I'm sure that it helps.
And what are the advice you would give to people when finding an advisor? Because obviously, what you don't want is having someone come on the cap table, even if it's a very low percentage, and that really doesn't help you, right? Like, so what's the advice to finding a great advisor?
Yeah, I think the first advice is do not immediately try to get them on your cap table, for sure. Because I think then in biotech, you need so many rounds that you want to have a crowded cap table in the end because you will find no investors anymore. So that would be my advice number one. Advice number two is, again, talk to a lot of people who also know this expert and see if this is somebody who A, has the expertise, but B, is also somebody you as a team can work with, which is, again, a very part of the equation again.
No, for sure. And I'm curious, one last question on that before we jump to the next section, but how do you make sure that the advisor gets enough value if you don't give in part of the company?
Well, sometimes they are paid for the service that they deliver. Some are just so believing in the pay it forward principle that they intrinsically want to support the company. These are the best, of course, if you can get those. And I think a lot of them might be interested in part of the company, but for me, then first you need to build this relationship and see if it really adds value. Getting somebody on is easy, getting somebody off is a totally different thing.
Well, look, we're getting towards the last section of this episode. The last section is called the fire questions. You will have 1 sentence maximum to answer any of these questions. Are you ready for that?
I am.
Well, you'll see. What's the biggest mistake biotech startups make when raising pre-seed?
Selling a technology and not a product.
How important is IP for securing investment?
Important, but it's not everything.
Why do many investors shy away from pre-seed biotech investment?
Because the real numbers game is too far off.
What's one biotech sector that is currently underrated, according to you?
Animal health.
Very interesting. What do you think will happen in that sector?
Well, I think there's a lot of things moving there. But okay, I could only use one sentence, right? But okay, yeah, there's a lot movement there. But I feel that a lot of investors are a bit afraid of this intensifying everything that has to do with animal cultivating animals, and I think that's not always correct. There's still a lot of opportunities to make the animals that we still need, whether it's as pets or as food, to make it for them an easier and healthier environment to live in. And I think their biotech can definitely be a solution.
Yeah, and I think there's also a trend from a consumer perspective as well. Like a lot more people these days think about, the condition for animals and think about, if I'm going to buy eggs, do I want the cheapest one or do I want the one where like chickens were, living a decent life, right? Like I think that's a trend that we see more and more. What's the most exciting biotech innovation you've seen recently?
I'm excited on everything that has to do with microbiome and how that could turn into potential solutions. Can be human, by the way, as well as soil microbiome. There's so much still to discover there.
What's one piece of advice for biotech funders navigating early stage financing?
Be honest on what you have in your hands and be a bit more ambitious on what you could do on the long term.
So that's that famous saying that people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. Do you think that holds true in biotech as well?
Oh my God, for sure. Yes, that's spot on.
What's one advice would you give to someone that's looking to invest in biotech?
Early stage or just in general?
I guess you can give both.
Okay, I think if it's early stage, be empathic and value the people as much as the technology. Value the people more than the technology. In general, have a clear Have a clear thesis on what you are doing and why you are doing it. For yourselves, for startups, for others. Be different.
And I think that's very much a part of VC, which is like, I feel like VC is a lot about making sure that whenever things go wrong, you keep believing in the product and you keep holding true to the story that you told yourself a few months or a few years before when you invested. I think a lot of the job of the VC is really to make sure that you invest in companies and have the conviction that this will be a great company no matter what happens, right? And I think that holds true for biotech as well. What's the biggest barriers to accelerating biotech? Do you think it's investment?
For me, it would be regulation.
Very interesting. Do you think Europe could do more?
Europe will do more. I think they definitely can. I think they're on the right track to do more. And I still think that regulation should be a stimulator for innovation instead of a blocker.
You've been able to successfully raise or at least invest money through a corporate and build that accelerator. If someone is listening right now and wants to raise a fund or build an accelerator on top of a corporate, like what's one advice you would give that person?
Yeah, I think again, it's important to find a spot where you are good at and where you can add value. I think that's key. That's what we really try to do, to be different than what's already out there.
Who's the next climate venture capital that I should interview in this podcast?
A woman, for sure. Well, we already briefly touched upon them. ECBF, Maria Sano. I would suggest Maria Sano.
Definitely. If people want to reach out because they either have a project or they want to co-invest with you, where can they find you online?
Yeah, they definitely can find us on LinkedIn, Biotope by VIB, or just contact me, Annick Verween. And yes, we are always looking for as well interesting startups as well as potential investors.
Well, look, I learned a lot with you today about biotech startups. I've learned a lot about the situation currently with like the early stage funding, which could be better. Also learned that regulation could play a big role there. I think it was a great episode. And listeners, if you like this episode and if you like the show, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube or give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thank you so much, Annick.
Thank you.